Jean Taylor. Jean Taylor. Go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
Hello, I'm Jean Taylor, and I'm the president of the Catskill 3500 Club. The club consists of members who have climbed all 35 of the Catskill peaks over 3,500 feet. You can see the back of my sweatshirt for the list of them, as well as aspirants. We will soon welcome our 2,000th member. We spend time and money in the Catskills, maintain trails and lean-tos, and work with the DEC Rangers and other Catskill organizations. We'll later submit a letter, but today I want to emphasize our main messages. First, strong support of the prohibition of hydrofracking in state lands and the FADs, the filtration avoidance determination areas, together with eliminating some of the current weakening words like unless approval is granted after site-specific review. Second, to extend the prohibition on drilling to further areas in the Catskills. I'm limiting to the Catskills because that's what our organization does. Also, extending the prohibition to the not leasing oil and gas rights underneath the state land, and strong regulations with sufficient money to set aside for strong enforcement. We would like to address a concern in addition to those already mentioned by others, namely the land. If drilling is allowed within 4,000 feet of state land, first of all, sorry, I meant to say one thing first, which is that as shown in the map of the Catskill High Peaks area, the state land is very fragmented. And all of it is not contained, all of the High Peaks area in the, these are the red area of the FAD in the report. Therefore, if drilling is allowed 4,000 feet away from state land, and especially if fracking under state land is allowed, we might wind up with wells ringing in the peaks, on some peaks, and up the valleys. The community and local impacts fact sheet does not address our concerns. The noise part talks about siting in a location where there's intervening topography and vegetation, hills and trees, but that's precisely where we are. It says new roads should be located as far as practicable from occupied structures. But again, that is where we are. In the visual part, it recommends that site-specific measures could be implemented in visually sensitive areas. We consider all of the Catskills to be visually sensitive. Invisible from the road is not the same as invisible from the summits. And restoration is a very poor substitute for destruction of the natural environment. To protect the sense of wilderness, all areas that are part of the view set of the Catskills, whether state land or not, should be prohibited not only from drilling, but also from gas pipeline networks, pipeline access roads, and compressor stations. Okay, you need to sum up, the scars on the landscape and the noise pollution from these operations, plus road construction and truck traffic, would shatter the experience of hiking there.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Next speaker is Arthur Schiff, but we're going to call the next 10 before Mr. Schiff goes. So we're just gonna call the next 10 and then.
At this time, I'd like to call speakers 21 through 30. Frank Eady, Kate Hudson, Ray Healy, Jim Stratton. Please take a seat in the very front row. Barbara Lee Jackson, John Paul Bernbach, Abram Loeb, Kim Michaels, Don Nevin, and Bonnie Lowenstein.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Arthur Schiff, and I'm here on behalf of City Council member Dan Gorodnick, who represents a district on the east side of Manhattan. First, a word about process. When dealing with a subject so important to the health and safety of millions of citizens throughout New York, It seems wrong for the DEC to have drafted and sought comments on its proposed regulations before receiving and taking into account comments on its draft SGEIS. We need to be confident that the response to the DSGEIS is informing the regulations and not being treated simply as procedure. Councilman Gorodnick is well aware of both the increasing energy needs of the city and the state, as well as the difficulties of quickly converting from carbon-based needs of fuels to alternative energy. Thus, we recognize the rationale for considering methods of efficiently accessing what appear to be New York's abundant supply of natural gas. However, in my view, no additional steps should be taken to tap New York's natural gas until every risk to the health and safety of New York citizens and to the state's environment have been considered and mitigated. And based on everything I have read and heard, I think we are far from that point. The DEC's proposed regulations appropriately would not allow hydrofracking in New York City's watershed. But substantial questions have been raised as to whether our drinking water infrastructure, much of it very old, is properly protected from the dangerous chemicals involved in the fracking process. The DEC's regulations propose allowing fracking activity around the infrastructure if additional restrictions are met. However, advocates and the city's Department of Environmental Protection maintain that such measures are inadequate and have proposed a 7-mile no fracking ban around the tunnels and aqueducts. New York City's drinking water, which today is pure enough not to require treatment, and our drinking water infrastructure cannot be compromised. I do not believe that the DEC's proposed rules are protective enough in this regard. Finally, I must call attention to questions that have been raised regarding how the state will enforce the regulations the DEC puts in place. First, responsibility for enforcement seems to have been divided among at least 5 state agencies. I fear this is a recipe for failure. Moreover, I am concerned that reductions in staffing caused by the lack of funding, especially at DEC, will necessarily result in inadequate enforcement. There has been a drop since 2003 of 20% reduction in DEC's enforcement headcount.
Please sum up, Mr. Schiff.
If these regulations are approved, the number of gas wells is expected to skyrocket and existing staff will simply be overwhelmed. In conclusion, the hydrofracking regulations raise significant questions crucial to the physical health and safety of New York. Until these questions are satisfactorily answered, the DEC must not approve hydrofracking in New York State.
Thank you. Frank Eady.
Good evening. My name is Frank Eady, and I am representing myself here. I live in Manhattan and have been working with the Sierra Club and many other groups.
Yeah, a little close. I'm sorry, Mr. Eady, just a little closer to the mic, yeah.
Sorry?
Speak a little closer to the mic.
Okay, good, okay. Anyway, 3.5 years ago, I was diagnosed as having chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a condition for which there is no known cure and makes me more susceptible to many other diseases of the respiratory system. As I've never smoked tobacco, I began to wonder what had caused the damage to my lungs. I didn't get any satisfactory answer until I began researching hydrofracking and discovered that like millions of other New Yorkers, I fit the criteria for victims of radon. Gas stoves, small, poorly ventilated kitchens, cooks frequently over an extended period of time, in my case, is about 30 years. Okay? That's what the experts on radon say are the best ways of coming down with lung cancer. I also learned that radon is second only to tobacco smoking in causing lung cancer, and that there is absolutely no safe level of exposure to radon. Studies have not been done, but there is every reason to believe that it produces just the kind of damage to my lungs that have been suffered by my lungs. When I got to, when I got my copy of the revised draft SGEIS, I searched for your discussion of radon, and what I found was exactly one mention. I'll read it. It's on page 6207. And it says, radon gas, which under most circumstances is the main human health concern from naturally occurring radioactive materials, is produced by the decay of radium-226, which occurs in uranium-238 decay chain. That's it. That's what the DEIS says about radon. There is no effort to decide or recommend or even regulate protections for people like myself, which includes many millions of New York City residents.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Eady. Kate Hudson.
Kate Hudson, Riverkeeper Watershed Program Director. We will be submitting a comprehensive set of written comments before the close of the comment period, but tonight I want to focus on one of the most deficient areas of DEC's environmental assessment: the complete absence of a full and fair socioeconomic impact analysis. In its 2009 scope, DEC committed to evaluate both the potential positive and negative impacts to community character that could result from drilling and hydrofracking the Marcellus Shale, which the scope identified as including altered land use patterns, increased traffic and need for public services, and effects on other land uses such as agriculture and tourism. DEC's 2011 SGEIS completely fails to fulfill this commitment. In particular, DEC has made no effort to quantify the potential costs of fracking to New York's economy and local communities, an omission that fundamentally flaws DEC's environmental impact analysis. For the SGEIS to pass legal muster, DEC must redo this aspect of the impact study so that it takes a hard look at fracking's potential adverse socioeconomic impacts. Not only are there a growing number of examples of recognized social and economic damage resulting from hydrofracking in other states, we have learned from Pennsylvania that industry will not cover all of its costs. Hydrofracking will require tax dollars to repair the hundreds of millions of dollars of damage that New York State DOT expects to see to local and state roads. And also, tax dollars will be required to pay the various state and local agencies charged with permitting and monitoring this industrial activity. Most of the taxpayers and communities asked to foot these bills will receive no direct money from hydrofracking activities. Because of this potentially huge gap between likely costs and possible revenues, Riverkeeper urges DEC to correct this glaring omission in its socioeconomic assessment by disclosing fracking's true potential costs to New York's economy and and local communities, and then provide a full opportunity for public comment on this and all other aspects of the SGEIS by holding the comment period open until 60 days after a complete socioeconomic analysis is made available to the public. If DEC fails to prepare and share with the public a full and fair analysis of the potential adverse community and socioeconomic impacts of fracking, Riverkeeper is prepared to go to court to ensure that this requirement is met. DEC and the governor owe New York taxpayers and communities an informed decision on whether allowing hydrofracking to go forward in New York makes any short or long-term economic sense. Without this analysis, it is impossible for New York taxpayers to judge whether opening the door to hydrofracking in New York will be a benefit or a socioeconomic disaster.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson. Ray Healy.
Hi, I'm Ray Healy. I live in the Upper West Side of New York with my wife and 2 daughters, and I'm an English professor. In order to just make a sound decision
Mr. Healy, just if you can, please address your comments.
Okay, in order to make a sound decision about fracking, it seems to me we should listen to smart people. Yesterday on New York One, Liz Holtzman was asked about fracking. Holtzman, as you remember, was a 4-term Congresswoman in New York, one of the smartest women in the room, if not the planet. And she said, why don't we wait until the EPA does a full environmental impact study on fracking before we move on? And I would agree with that. And you might ask yourself, why hasn't the EPA done the full environmental impact study? Well, of course, because of the infamous Halliburton exemption. They've been off the case ever since as you remember, the Halliburton loophole in the Bush-Cheney Energy Policy Act of 2005 granted an exemption from the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the EPA. And of course, this exemption means that the gas drillers are not required to even identify the more than 500 toxic chemicals they're deploying in fracking fluid. A lot of people talk about the water pollution in fracking. I'd like to point out that the air pollution is in many ways equally, if not more, dangerous. From Gasland, the wonderful movie about this topic, did you know that in Sublette County, Wyoming, Sublette County, Wyoming is about the size of Connecticut. It's giant. It's sparsely populated, 1 person per square mile. It's basically a few people and open land, etc. So what happened out there? In 2005, they put in thousands and thousands of wells, and now routinely the air in Wyoming is worse, in this county in Wyoming, is worse than in LA or Houston. Now, do we want to bring that here? Okay, here's what's going on here, though. Unfortunately, according to Citizens Campaign for the Environment, has identified 20,000 gas company leases in 8 counties in the Finger Lakes region, covering 602,000 acres, amounting to 30% of the county's land. Now, if the gas companies are allowed to open up these 20,000 leases, which could be God knows how many thousand of wells, we are going to recreate the situation of Sublette County in upstate New York, and that is intolerable. I urge you to ban hydrofracking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. Assemblymember Deborah Glick.
Hi, I'm Assemblymember Deborah Glick, representing a large part of Lower Manhattan. I continue to oppose New York's proposed venture into hydrofracking. We will have a much longer testimony provided in writing to DEC. I will try to hit some of the high points. I understand the time constraints. Not only is water a scarce resource and our water supply is precious, but our food shed is also critical. And many of the places, the farms that are outside of the watershed area are the very farms that provide food to our green markets that we are trying to extend to all communities in New York. So we're endangering not just our water, but our food shed. There's also, we run the range, I appreciate it, but I don't want to eat into my time. We also will overburden our depleted wastewater treatment plants that do not have the capacity to handle these hazardous chemicals. Our highway infrastructure is seriously underfunded. Increased traffic by trucks bringing water in and out will endanger local communities' budgets. And there is the potential for creating a housing crisis through the technical default of mortgages not written to allow drilling permits. It is short-sighted to look at the revenues that will be created because those are primarily from the amount of dollars received through permits, and that will be far less than the cost of ameliorating the situation if an accident takes place. In addition, there's the potential loss of revenue from less tourism and reduced interest in purchasing our agricultural products. Agriculture is our third largest industry in the state, and we're endangering it. I would point out to you that we are also, in the last several years, since 1996, there have been at least 4 major floods that have devastated the region where fracking will occur. Floodwaters, by their very nature, are uncontainable. Telling us that we are going to protect the areas outside of a particular region is ridiculous. The Hudson River was brown, this color, brown, from the floods in August, and it ran brown through September. You cannot protect the watershed for New York City from the floodwaters that will undoubtedly occur as NYSERDA, a sister agency, has just reported that we will face climate changes that will include more floods. DEC's report really says not very much about the contaminated water and how it will be handled and where we will get all of the huge amount of water that is required for doing this process. And what we will do with the millions of gallons that contain highly corrosive salts, carcinogens, and radioactive elements. I will conclude by saying that drilling companies have promised us that everything is safe, just as they said deep water drilling would be safe, and it is until it isn't. So, endangering our environment, people cannot fight oil companies alone. They rely on the government to protect themselves and the environment, and it is.
Thank you. Assemblymember, I really need you to sum up.
And I will simply conclude by saying that this process is not safe and that until the EPA finishes its report in the spring of 2012, we must not proceed with this. And you need more hearings because 2,000 people showed up in Binghamton, and you've seen what's here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Jim Stratton. Jim Stratton. Mr. Stratton.
Hi, I'm the former chair of Community Board 1, and for 18 years I represented this area as a Democratic district leader. Several other organizations I'm involved with.
Sorry, Mr.
I'm sorry.
Speak up a little.
Oh, sorry.
He's there. He's up there.
Okay. I also have a home on the Delaware River upstate in Sullivan County, and I'm therefore in danger of having my drinking water despoiled wherever I go. 6 active fracking wells would require as much water as a full mile of the Delaware River, an entire mile of the Delaware River and the upper Delaware area. 600 wells would take as much water as the entire river down to the Delaware Water Gap. Just take your pocket calculator out and you'll figure that out. Wells come by the thousands, and each well is expected to frack at least 3 times, each time pouring many thousands of gallons of deadly pollutants into that huge volume of water. And when the pollution is regurgitated back to the surface, all this water is left to the tender care of the industry. The dictionary, too, is left to the fracking industry's tender care, because the term fracking they carefully define as only the interaction between the shale and the poisons that are thrust under high pressure more than a mile into the earth. By definition, then, regurgitation of poisons back to the water table, therefore, do not apply. This is not fracking. That's fracking downstairs. Up here, we don't call it anything. This is like a gun manufacturer claiming that guns have never killed anyone because a bullet is not a gun. That's how their propaganda is distributed as television commercials. They can say that the process is clean and safe, but no amount of lobbying money will make it safe. Only real regulation, or much better, banning the whole process, can do that. Your current regulations imagine only a single carefully primped and pampered well, poisons magically transported and everything leak-proof. It doesn't consider the assault force of 1,000 wells, 1,000 trucks, and billions of gallons of death water on a fragile river system. So take your draft regulations back and either make them real or ban the whole process. We should be caring about life on this planet, which is something that the fracking industry doesn't give a damn about.
Thank you. Barbara Lee Jackson. Barbara Lee Jackson.
Hello, good night. Thank you, Mr. Russo, DEC. I don't have too much to say to Governor Cuomo right now. But when I went through the executive summary of the draft report, the thought that came to me is that we're going to hell in a handbasket. Let me start by asking, why in God's name will we in New York State continue to allow the perpetration of an environmental travesty such as hydraulic fracturing, when we know that the expansion of this illegitimate process only occurred because Halliburton, under the leadership of its former CEO, turned Vice President of the United States, whose name will not be mentioned here tonight, right, created the now infamous Halliburton loopholes. Those loopholes have allowed natural gas companies to employ a technology which would have been outlawed under existing federal environmental protection regulations. That should have been a clue, right? Hydraulic fracturing is a dirty business and it's not suitable for the people of New York State. Be that as it may, we are here today trying to make sense of absolute nonsense, Mr. Russo. Absolute nonsense. If the technology employed in hydraulic fracturing was environmentally sound in the first place, right, why would it ever need loopholes, putting the process outside of the law that ensures that American citizens have clean air and clean water? Okay? All right, the little bit I know about science, okay. How did DEC determine that methane usually present in wells can contaminate the water and not the fracking fluid seepage and pressure? Number one, New York State DEC is not staffed to handle the permits, no less the monitoring of tens of thousands of wells. What happens to the aquifers that have not been identified as primary or principal, but still are a part of the underground water supply for the people of New York State? What about the unknown chemical additives that meet the confidential business information exception to the Department's Record of Access program and will not be subject to public disclosure? I have a problem with that. Okay. 18, 17. And lastly, it looks like the national natural gas industry is experiencing a glut on the market, as was reported in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. that means that they have so much gas, they don't know what to do with it. And if that's the case, then we don't need hydraulic fracturing in New York State.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
John Paul Bernbach. John Paul Bernbach. Mr. Bernbach, not here? John Paul Bernbach, not here? Oh, okay. Please, everybody, if you could just, we have this front row so that we can move this along quickly. We have a lot of people who want to speak. So please, move to the front row. Yeah, I fully understand he's there now, but he wasn't where we want him to be. So please, if you can, move to the front row. We can get everybody much faster.
All right.
Mr. Bernbach.
Thank you. My name is John Paul Bernbach. I am the chairman for Environmental Affairs of Democratic Leadership for the 21st Century, but this evening I'm speaking for myself, not for the organization. I think it's obvious at this point that after 4 days of public hearings that New Yorkers, not just in this room, but throughout the state, are overwhelmingly opposed to hydraulic fracturing. The gas industry has spent literally millions of dollars trying to convince us that fracking can be done safely, but we're not buying it. So DEC, why are you, and better yet, why is your boss, Governor Cuomo? Gas industry and landowner coalitions across the state begged their supporters to come out in force to these hearings. And yet, even in Binghamton, according to the Wall Street Journal, no less, supporters of fracking were outnumbered by opponents by a factor of 4 to 1. Thousands and thousands of concerned citizens, voting citizens, have turned out to express their anger at this rush to drill, led by the governor. These are the same citizens who voted for Governor Cuomo and believed him when he said that all watersheds are sacrosanct. Those are his words, not mine. And that he would listen to the science. But we know that this process is not so much about science as about politics. So let's talk about politics. We know that this governor knows how to take a bold and wise political stand when he needs to. Earlier this year, when Governor Cuomo led the nation in passing same-sex marriage, New Yorkers literally danced in the streets. And though I'm sure the governor sincerely cares about the civil rights of all New Yorkers, we also know that this was a wise political move. Every year, more and more Americans support same-sex marriage, and conversely, every year, as more and more Americans learn about hydraulic fracturing, they become more and more vehemently opposed to it, as the people in this room clearly demonstrate. Now, the difference between the people in this room and the rest of the voters in the state is that the people in this room are more informed at the moment. But this room is also filled with people, such as myself, who are hell-bent on getting the word out. And we're not going to rest until the rest of the citizens of this state understand what is at stake here. Now, this is not a threat. This is simply democracy. Every year, fracking becomes more and more politically toxic. New Yorkers are an educated population. We think critically. We read newspapers. We educate ourselves about current events. This is as true of hydrofracturing as everything.
Wait. Mr. Burns, stop the clock. Again, please, go, proceed. You know what? You may call it a waste of time, but we're gonna have order in here, and we will take our time so that people are allowed to be heard and to speak. Now, we'll give him his extra time to finish his statement.
Thank you. The governor should think very carefully about the political as well as the environmental impact of the issues he's weighing right now. Forming strong alliances with pro-fracking senators like Tom Libous and accepting campaign contributions for 2014 from this toxic industry will only hurt him with the voters of New York State. Governor Cuomo has demonstrated that he can lead not just the state, but the nation by taking the right stand, both politically and morally, on the important issues of the day, and New Yorkers have loved him for it. We urge him to consider this moment very carefully.
Thank you. Abram Loeb.
My name is Abram Loeb. I'm a member of New York Residents Against Drilling, as well as a landowner from Shenango County, Afton, New York. I unwittingly drove on roads where frack fluid had been sprayed the last couple of winters, I guess. I'm not happy about that. Where I live is beautiful land, meadows, pristine woods, wildlife. We have our own unfiltered well where I drink water every day. It's the best tasting water I've ever had. I want to keep it that way for the future generations, for my children, their children, and on down. The native people of this land, the original inhabitants, thought 7 generations ahead before making decisions that would affect the future. Are we even thinking 10 years what's going to become of our land? I don't think Governor Cuomo is really truly thinking about his re-election in 2014 if he goes through with this process. I could repeat many, many things that have been said here today. We know that the SGEIS on fracking is not a scientific document. The cumulative health impacts of fracking chemicals, methane migration, heavy metals, and radiation contaminating our water have not been addressed. The cumulative impacts on our health from the heavy truck traffic, 24-hour-a-day compressor stations, condensate tanks, leaking pipelines, polluting our air have not been addressed. The economic impacts of all the jobs lost to the agricultural industry or agriculture, tourism. Who is going to want to drive to the Finger Lakes and drive through the doorway to the Finger Lakes, the southern tier where I live, when it's polluted? We will hold Governor Cuomo accountable in 2014 if he allows us. It will be political suicide. And I ran myself for office. I didn't win this election. It was my first attempt, but gave the locals some opposition. We did win other races in our area where fracking was the main issue. In areas that are normally heavily Republican, Democrats won on fracking. So I would keep that in mind, Governor Cuomo. Withdraw the SGEIS now. Ban the practice. Do not allow the southern tier of New York or any part of New York to be a sacrifice zone.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
Ban fracking now. Thank you.